I'm Scott Gration, and I'm really happy to be with you today to share some of my experiences. I've been an ambassador to Kenya, the Special Envoy to Sudan, and I completed a 32-year military career flying fighters and working as a senior officer in the United States Air Force. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of figuring out what are the right things and doing them. And then we're going to figure out how to get style points by doing those right things right. Finally, we're going to figure out what do you do when doing the right things just doesn't work and you get hammered. It happened to me. Stand by for more.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Do you truly know the difference between doing the right thing and doing things right? Well, stay tuned, because that's exactly where we're going on today's show, because we have a guest who is a US Ambassador to Kenya, Special Envoy to the Sudan. My name is Dov Baron. I am your host here, and I am the Dragoness. I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. You can find out more by simply going to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, which is Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question of how can we bring people together who completely disagree. This is exactly what your heart, soul, and mind have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and oftentimes intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. That includes astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, Grammy award-winning entertainers, even some folks that you might disagree with who become truly fascinating. Simply go over to dovbaron.com to find out how you can sink your teeth into Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into your podcasts. If you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Leadership is so often about making the right decisions, but sometimes the right decision isn't right. So as a leader, what do? Do you just follow orders and in the process take a chance at maybe getting thrown under the bus? Or do you close your eyes, clench your teeth, and do something else? The question is, under pressure, do you truly know the difference between doing the right thing and doing things right? Well, stay tuned, because that's exactly where we're going on this show. My guest on this episode is Ambassador Scott Gration. Scott Gration has had the unique career as a diplomat and a military leader. His diplomatic assignments have included serving as the US Ambassador for Kenya and US Special Envoy for the Sudan, and a special assistant to the president in the White House. Scott Gration retired as a Major General from the US Air Force after serving 32 years as a fighter pilot and senior military leader. Having spent nearly half of his life in Africa and the Middle East, he has a deep and profound understanding of Kenya and East Africa, including the languages and culture of each region. Scott remained in Kenya following his diplomatic assignment and served as a businessman and humanitarian for another 5 years. He now serves as a US-based keynote speaker and business consultant, Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome the author of the unique and inspirational memoir, Flight Path, Son of Africa, to Warrior-Diplomat, retired Major General and Ambassador Scott Gration.
What a great introduction. Thank you very much. That was awesome.
So glad to have you here, mate. Thank you so much. It took us a while to get here, but I'm really glad we did. Where I like to always start the show is to ask you, as a leader, and a leader in a very big way for you, diagnostically, and in your absolute honesty, what do you see as the state of leadership today globally? You know, so whether that's political, whether that's economically, business, you know, what do you see as the state of leadership today?
I think it's changing. There's so many factors in our society, in the economic spheres, that are causing us to adjust. And it's those leaders that can understand this and adjust, who are agile in their thinking, that are going to be successful. And not only successful for themselves, but for their clients and for the people that work for them. It's such an important time. Doug, if I could just take 1 second and just tell you how I've sort of organized this in my own mind.
Thank you.
This puzzle is not unique to me, but the carving is. I carved this puzzle about a month ago just to remind myself of what we're dealing with as leaders. You know, these links can signify what's happening politically, culturally, racially in our country, what's happening economically, and what's happening with the health issues that we're facing. Yes. And if we try to solve each one by itself, we get lost. We can't take this apart. But when we get perspective and we look at it from a distance, we can see how it's all tied together. We can see the beauty in it. We can see the beauty in the diversity. We can see the beauty, and we can look for opportunities. And for me, that's what the leaders of today have to do. They've got to step back. They got to gain perspective. They can't focus on just their bottom line. They can't focus on just their people that are quarantining. They can't focus on just what's happening in the political sphere and some of the drama that's happening now. They've got to step back and say, how does my company, how do my people, how do the needs that I'm trying to fill fit into this changing, complex world that we're living in now? And Bill, I'll tell you, this is exciting. This is what leadership is about. This is doing the right things. It's climbing the right tree. It's doing the right stuff for your people and your business and your country and your community.
But I agree with everything you said. And my but is that, do you see that happening in leadership though? I see that. I fully agree with you that that is the recipe. That is what is needed. But I'm not sure that leaders are particularly good at this time of focusing on the interwoven links, as you put it, and tend to be very much focused on a particular idealism or a particular, bottom line or whatever it might be. There's a single focus, and we don't live in a single focus world anymore. We live in, as you said, a very interwoven one.
I think this is really what's separating out the difference between a good leader and a good manager.
Yes.
For those managers that have been working so hard to improve the bottom line, to improve efficiencies and the effectiveness of their organization, when they're faced with our economy and the problems that we're having with the healthcare, it's very hard to optimize all those things in our environment. Absolutely. However, this is where leaders shine. This is where you find initiative. This is where you inspire your people. This is where you figure out, do I need to change? Do I need to adjust? How can I use this new environment to find my niche, to find a need that I can fill? And that's what a leader does. If you're just trying to optimize what you had before, I got to tell you,
Head in the water.
It's not going to work.
No. You spent all this time in Kenya and East Africa and that entire region. What, looking at it, you're back now, you're in the United States again. As I said in the introduction, you spent more than half your life in that region.
Mhm.
What don't we as in North America, or for that matter, much of the rest of the world, what don't we understand about Kenya or about the East Africa region that we really need to, that we really should? Because there's a lot of turmoil there, particularly now. Most people may not be aware of that. I just follow world politics. But what do you think we really need to understand about that region?
One thing, there's so many things, but I'm just going to pick out one thing.
Sure.
Right from the very beginning, when I was a young kid, I learned how important the community is, how important relationships are, how important elders are. And I also learned the importance of servant leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're really interested in your community, if you really care about those people that are in your family, your extended family, and part of your community, you will operate differently. You will actually start living out what I appreciate in the Air Force core values of not only integrity first and excellence in what we do, but service before self. And if you
Mm-hmm.
really understand that your job is to make sure that your customers are taken care of, to make sure that the people that work for you are taken care of, I tell you, and in addition to doing the things you need to as an individual, the other stuff falls together. And I learned that in Africa. The
Mm-hmm.
priority is making sure that people are fed, they have someplace to sleep, and it's those big things that are important, and more important than how many dollar bills you're putting in your wallet at the end of the day.
So that region, as a core um, value, what I'm hearing is that is in community, is that they
Yeah.
understand and care about community. Do you think that it's interesting because we've become culturally, politically more tribal in our thinking, and we
Mhm.
hold that as a negative, and it is a negative because it makes us war against other tribes. But this is tribal in a very different way. It's tribal in a sense of community, right? I just want to make sure that our listeners or our viewers are understanding that.
Yeah, certainly tribes are important and those allegiances are still there in Africa. But
Mm-hmm.
there's that concept of the global village, the concept of the village where everybody has its role, where
Mm-hmm.
everybody contributes to the village and making it functional, making it safe, making it work for the people, and making sure it continues. And this is so important. And yes, it's important to your nationality, your tribe, and all the other stuff. But really, what's important is where you are and that community where you're living. And you got to make that a priority, whether it's in business or whether it's in just your family values. You got to make sure that you figure out what servant leadership is about, where your priority is on the big stuff in the end, and not the little things like your bank account. I got to tell you, I saw this long time ago when I was listening to an individual who was in his deathbed. At the
Mm-hmm.
very end, he was rich, but he said, Scott, I don't even care about all the things I've accumulated. I don't care about all the things I've achieved. All I care about is my family and my friends.
Sure.
That's who I want around me. And I tell you what, when we're young, we're out there looking for the dollar bills. We're looking for the cars. We're looking for the house. We're looking for the swimming pool. And then when it's all over, you're saying, I don't care about that stuff. Give
No.
me my friends and give me my people who I care about. Give me my community.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's important. And we forget that when we're trying to earn our money and we're trying to earn our fame and we're trying to get ahead. But in the end, you got to keep everything in perspective. That's why that puzzle is so good, because it allows you to pull back and keep what you're doing in perspective and making sure at the end of the day, when you've been successful in the right stuff. And that's what I mean by doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the questions I love to ask my guests, everybody claims to be an influencer. Who is someone we might not know or might not even consider who's been a major influence in you and on your leadership? Again, this might be somebody we've never heard of. It might be somebody we know well. I don't know. But who's been a major influence on you as a leader?
It's a great question, and I've been really fortunate to have had everybody from a father who was a role model to me, and to being able to work in the White House and in the highest level of government as a senior military leader, as a diplomat. But I tell you, as I reflect upon what you just asked me, all those things that I learned from the people, probably I'm not smart enough to figure it out when people tell me this or show me this. I had to live through an experience that changed my life. And I would like to just take a half a second now and just tell you about it. I was flying in a single seat fighter, an F-5 fighter, and I was the instructor pilot. I was on the wing. We fly about 3 feet apart when we're flying in close formation. And I was flying in this.
Really? It's that close?
Yeah, that's the way we fly, because you can't see through the clouds very well. If you're more than that, you have a hard time.
Well, we see these things, or look up and we see these things and we think, yeah, it looks very close, but it probably isn't in real life. But it's actually closer than I imagined. 3 feet is like, oh crap, like a tiny little twitch and oh, bye-bye.
Well, you just nailed it.
Scratch my nose, we're dead.
But it's going to get worse.
Oh
Because we were descending into San Antonio, and I was the instructor pilot, making sure that the guy in front of me, who was practicing for an instrument check ride, didn't hit anything harder than a cloud. As we descended down, it was getting late in the afternoon. The sun was setting, and we had to go through this huge thunderstorm.
Oh,
Pretty soon, 3 feet was too far away. I could barely see the other airplane. And I moved in as close as I could. Any closer, I would have hit him, and any farther away, I would have lost sight. I was flying off of a couple of lights on his tail and his wing, and then the rotating beacon. He became disoriented and had to turn off the rotating beacon, which left me with just a couple of lights. And I was in there as close as I could. Rain is coming down my canopy, almost horizontal. We're going 350 miles an hour and going down towards San Antonio. I knew we were going to be turning into a left turn at 4,000 feet, and I was ready for this, and poof, everything disappeared. I lost sight of the other airplane. I rolled out and pulled, and I looked in my airplane at my gauges, because I had been flying off the other airplane this whole time, and I saw that I was on my back. 135 degrees of bank. My nose was 60 degrees nose low. My altimeter was winding down. The airspeed was increasing. And then I broke out of the clouds over San Antonio. I could see the lights rushing up at me, and I yanked the throttles to idle, and I rolled level, and I pulled on the stick, and I was still screaming toward the ground. And I pulled out between a farmhouse and a row of trees, 200 feet maybe above the ground. I knew I should have been a fireball. A miracle happened that night, and I climbed back up in the clouds. My head was spinning, and I just had to yell at myself, "You're straight and level, you're 300 knots." And I landed in San Antonio. But that night, every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was the ground rushing up and me dying. And it was a terrible experience, and it taught me more than I learned from anybody else in my life, because I recognized that night, had I died, yeah, my wife would have missed me. They would have been sad, and my son never would have, who was 2 years old at the time, never would have known me as a dad, and my squadron would have missed me. But if I had died, I would have left a room that was filled with accolades and accomplishments and trophies and awards, and I'd been very successful.
Mm-hmm.
What good was it? And I learned that I needed to look at my community. I need to look outside myself, and I need to do something that counted. And I ended up going to Uganda, and we can talk about that later. But the bottom line is, it was that experience that changed my life and told me, you gotta do the right things. It's not about accumulating awards. It's not about getting accolades. It's not about winning. It's about doing the right thing.
How old were you at that point?
I was 29 years old.
Wow. So you're a young man.
Yes.
So I have to ask, because it's just begging to be asked. How was the other guy?
The other guy was fine. He was really worried, because what happened is, and I know this gets a little technical, but instead of turning like this to the left, he had made a mistake and turned to the right. And so when I rolled out and pulled to get away from his airplane, I pulled into the ground. And
Oh,
he knew what had happened,
right.
and was so grateful when I came on the radio, requested clearance to land, because he knew I was alive.
Wow.
But the reality is that it was a combination of a lot of things. It's not his fault. There's a lot of things that happened that night, and we all made probably mistakes in hindsight. But the
Mm.
reality, I'm grateful for those 30 seconds over San Antonio. I
So
don't want to repeat them,
no,
but
no,
I
but I
learned
gotta
so
ask,
much that night.
why did that? I mean, I think you probably know that I have had several brushes with death,
Mm.
that I've officially died 5 times. I don't recommend it, by the way. It's not quite all bright lights and it's not quite like that for me anyway. However, why do you think that your experience, because I've been asked many times, did falling off the mountain, did that change your life? And my answer is no. It did not change my life. It embedded me on my egoic path. It made me more rigid, more focused. It made me worse, because when people would ask me how you doing, I'd say, I'm great. I'm coming back, because I was a leader. I'd been a boxer. I'd been a martial artist. I'd been a ghetto kid. I knew how to be tough. And so I was going to be tough through it. And it wasn't until like a year, almost a year later, when I really broke down and felt a dark depression. And then that's when my life changed. So I always say that there is a pivotal moment, which is the falling off the mountain or the potential crash. And then there is a choice moment. And that's the moment when life changes. The pivotal moment is the option to change. But for me, I went deeper into my cycle. But the choice point was where I could go back to normal, or I could make another choice. And I'm always fascinated by that when I hear somebody talk about that moment for them, because we all assume that was the moment you changed. I doubt it. Is it true for you? I'm not saying it isn't for you. Maybe it was. But if it was, what was it pushed you towards community and the realization that, the shit didn't matter, but what mattered was something deeper, community or relationship?
You're exactly right. For a couple of days, I really felt changed in that I couldn't get over how close I was. I've been close to death a lot of times before. I've been in
Sure.
combat, missiles fired at me and you react to it. But this is really a time where I saw death coming up and I could relive it. And for me, I realized that while I still needed to continue to be the best fighter pilot there was in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and I still needed to try my best to be a great dad and a great husband, all those things would stay the same, but my motivation needed to be different. I was doing it for me though, and I needed to start thinking about, it's not about me. It's about making a lasting difference. There's that little thing called the dash, and people talk about, you're given a birth date and you don't know when the death date is, but that little dash is your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I just decided through this experience, I didn't want my dash to be a bunch of trophies. And I got to tell you, I've been fortunate. A White House fellow, one of the 10 outstanding young men of America. I mean, I've got it,
Yeah.
but it was worthless, absolutely worthless compared to making a difference in my community. And at the same time, this was Uganda was having trouble. I'm hearing about Idi Amin. People don't probably remember him, but there was 600,000 people that got killed under his persecution, and
So
things
you
were
went to
going.
Uganda while Amin was in power? While
Yeah, he was just beginning to leave, and so I ordered some tools, and I went down and got a ticket, and went into Kampala. And I tell you, that was a scary experience, because I'm on an airplane with just me and a couple of people trying to get into Kampala.
because
And
nobody's going to. For those of you who don't know, are not old enough. I remember Idi Amin with all of his medals and making himself the king of Scotland and all that stuff. I remember him very, very well.
yeah,
And nobody was going to Kampala. Everybody was staying a long way away from Uganda, because this was, in case you don't know, this was a dictator who had taken over Uganda, who would swim across the river race his men across the river in a swimming contest. And if they beat him, he would shoot them. And if they came in last, he would shoot them. So, you know, gives you a kind of a context of the kind of loony we're talking about.
Yeah.
And you're voluntarily buying a ticket and going there. So maybe you were the crazy man.
I was, but you know, I grew up in Congo,
Right.
and in 1964, the Congo erupted after independence, and we had to evacuate. We lost everything we owned, and in fact, there's lessons there, because I learned that it's what's in your head and what's in your mind and the relationships you have that are important, that nobody can take from you. You can take everything else, and I really didn't put that lesson to my heart until my near miss experience. But it was Ugandan people that gave us food, they gave us shelter, they gave us a place to stay. And I almost owed it back to the Ugandans. So when I heard that people were suffering so much, that they were being taken at night, and just as you described, taken out and murdered. And it was just such a tough situation. And I decided that I had to do something for the people that had done so much for me and my family. So I went back, and that night, the first night I get to my room, it was in the tuberculosis ward, and it was late at night by the time I get there, and all my tools had been confiscated at the airport, and I was sort of depressed, and I'm hearing all this shooting and bullets, and I played bullet billiards. I figured out that maybe if I put my bed underneath the window, it'd be the safest place for me. And I heard people shouting and dogs barking, and I felt so alone. But then the next morning I got up, and there was two little kids there outside my room. And I realized that they had never tasted salt and sugar and flour, you know, stuff that, and there was no running water. I mean, things that we take for granted, these folks had not had. And then I had an opportunity to meet with Dr. Masaba. He was the doctor that was there, and he ended up living in Germany, and ended up coming back to Uganda under this experience. And he gave up his practice and everything else. And one day, as we were hiding in the cornfields when the soldiers were running through the hospital, I said, Dr. Masaba, why are you here? You had a practice in Germany where you were making a lot of money, and you had security and safety. And he said, if I didn't come to Uganda, who would take care of my people? And that's, to me, what I learned about servant leadership. It's not about what you have. It's about what you need to instill in your company, and what you need to provide for your people, and the needs you must meet for your customers. And if you have that attitude in mind, I guarantee you will be successful. You will make it.
It's something you said there that immediately brought me back to something from your book. Because, you know, how a leader is seen in the moment can often be very different than how a leader is seen retrospectively as we look back. And, you know, I often like to say that the ego is a dry cleaner. It cleans out all the dirty spots. But sometimes it goes the other way, in that, you know, it sees only the bad. And, you know, I'm fascinated by that, the way that we look at history. And, you know, when I look at leadership today, and I see leaders who, when I looking back in history, and I see these leaders who, for me, were not bottom line. They were community. They were for the good of their company or the good of their country. I remember, I'm old enough to remember Jimmy Carter being president. And I remember him being very heavily criticized as a pretty bad president. And I always saw him as a humanitarian president, personally. I mean, he put solar panels on the White House back in those days. Reagan took them off, but he put them on there, right? Because he cared about the planet, and he cared about clean energy back in those days. I mean, you know, before people even understood solar power. You know, and he is obviously a Christian, and that's not my faith, but, you know, I watch him, and for me is the embodiment of the things I do love about Christianity. I mean, I think that he's not a radical loony screaming from the top of the building. He's a man who's walking in the path of Jesus. He is a servant leader, at a very old age with cancer, going out and building houses, homes for habitat. And he wrote the intro for your book.
Yes, that's true.
So you know him. Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Well, like
what a great leader.
I've been watching him for a long time, but when I was the special envoy to Sudan, one of the things that we needed to do before we had the referendum to see if the South Sudanese would separate from the North or vote for unity, we needed to get through a national election. And Jimmy Carter and the Carter Center was very involved in that democratic process. Also, Jimmy Carter almost single-handedly got rid of the guinea worm through his Carter Center and through his humanitarian efforts. And the guinea worm was just a scourge for so many Africans that have to drink water that come from non-potable sources, which is a lot of them. There's actually 2 billion people around the world that don't have access to enough potable water a day. And it's something that we sort of take for granted as Americans, where we can just drink out of our taps and that kind of thing. But Jimmy Carter and Rosalind were there, and I had an opportunity to meet with them and talk with them, and I saw, like you saw, that it was about his heart and about, he just cared, and he oozed caring, in everything he did. He wanted people to have a better future. And he was willing to do whatever it took. He was relatively old at that time, in terms of the way I saw him, but he had a young heart and he had a caring heart. And I determined that if I was going to live to be that old, I would try to have that as my priority too, to make a difference, because that's what leaders do. They make a difference, but make a difference in the right way. And that's why doing the right things is so important. And it's very important to figure out what those right things are, and then to commit your life to doing them, and not for personal accolade, but for making a difference. And if we can all make a difference in our lives, that's what it's all about. And that's what I'm striving to do.
Well, you brought up something there, Scott, that's very interesting. Making a difference by doing the right thing. But as somebody with a heavy background in psychology, I can tell you that Adolf Hitler thought he was doing the right thing. I can tell you that every dictator thinks they're doing the right thing. And the one thing I know for sure is the ego is masterful at justification. Everything is justified. There are people who voted in the 2016 election who didn't vote for, but voted against, right? Whether on either side, and they've done it again in 2020. So there's a justification. Well, I spoke to a friend of mine yesterday who is a military guy, a high-level military guy, and he said to me, he goes, I didn't really want to vote for this person. I don't like this person, but I don't want to vote for the other person. And I'm like, mate, that's not leadership. That is not leadership. If you vote for, you have the right to criticize. If you vote against, you don't. Because you put somebody in place and you're going, oh, well, I'm going to live with the consequences. And so this is very interesting to me, Scott, this piece, you've been an ambassador, you've been a major general, you've been a big lad, you've been, somebody important in the world of leadership at many different levels. Now you're in the business world, you're in all these places. Talk to us about that piece, Scott, that piece around understanding right versus the right thing. And how do you help people confront the distinction between justification, which they don't think is justification, they think is real, without going to maybe even without going to a religious book? I realize that you're probably a Christian, you likely go there, but maybe others don't. Maybe they're not that way. How do you help people get to that within themselves?
for me, it comes down to a couple basic tenets. And the first of all is that you have to have the right priorities. And the first priority, I think you have to take care of your health. I mean, you have to stay in shape, you have to be functional, because if you're not healthy, then you can't help anybody. Then secondly, you really have to focus on who are the people that you're trying to reach, your coworkers, your friends, your family, and that kind of thing. And you need to prioritize them properly. And then finally, it comes to prioritizing yourself. You're at the end of all this stuff, really. And I think it takes developing a couple things. One is an inquisitive mind, a curiosity. I mean, I try to learn why behind everything that I see. I like to know what's happening. I try to make associations between things I see, and I like that concept that President Kennedy brought up about the space program. Some people see things that are and ask why. I see things that are not and ask why not. And you've got to have that attitude where you're always trying to be inquisitive and curiosity. But then at the bedrock of all this comes down to your values. I believe that the Air Force core values of integrity first and service before self and excellence in all you do is a good start. And you've got to be able to bounce what you do every day against some values. And the integrity piece is so important because no one can give it to you. You have to live it. And no one can take it from you. You have to give it. And the bottom line is integrity matters. If you don't have it, nothing else matters. And if you do have it, nothing else matters. And I've proven this over and over again, where I've had situations go belly up and things go bad. But if you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I did the right thing, I did my best, and I did it with integrity, and I would do the same thing when no one's looking, then you don't have to worry about anything. And if you have the values and you have the priorities, I think the rest of it falls into place.
So I'm going to push back. And the reason I'm going to push back is not because I disagree with you, but because I want to I want to answer the questions of leaders listening in. Because as a military guy, as a diplomat, as a special envoy, you have had leaders leading you. Even though you've been at the very much upper echelon of leadership, and you've likely had leaders who've led you who were, in their mind, doing what was right. And in your mind, based on your level of integrity, based on your set of values that you knew were completely not right. And as a result, you know, it's what I said in the intro, you've gotten thrown under the bus. Talk to us about that, because again, I'm back to this justification piece, which is the leader says, listen, this is what I'm doing and I don't like it, but it's the right thing to do right now. And as a result, you're going under the wheels of the bus.
I think every leader has a responsibility to look over their shoulder and make sure they have willing followers, because I've seen a lot of leaders that don't have willing followers. They have followers, but they're not willing. And that's not leadership. That's dictatorship or authoritarianism or whatever you want to call it. But the reality is leaders have willing followers. Now, I've been in places where I've had to follow because of the rank structure of the military or because of whatever. I've had to follow leaders I didn't agree with. In every case, I made my position known. And if I needed more resources, if I needed more guidance, if whatever it is, I would make that known. Once I was told, shut up and color and stay in the lines, I had two options. One is I pick up my crayons and begin coloring with my head down. And the other one is for me to resign. I've had to offer resignation papers twice, and both times they were not taken. And once I was forced to resign, but the reality is I've had to pick up my crayons and color, and I had to accept that maybe I didn't know the whole big picture, or maybe I just didn't know, but it didn't come to resignation, but it came to me buckling under. As followers, we have to do that. But as leaders, you need to take the opportunity to listen. And
Right.
once you listen and you still come up with the same decision, then people just have to obey the rules, obey the guidance, and pick up their crayons and color. And there are times where I've had to do that as a leader, where I've had to tell people, I know this is hard. I know you don't want to do this, but this is what we have to do. And it's tough, but sometimes you have to do that, both as a leader and as a follower. You sometimes just have to pick up your crayons and color or get out.
And so the decision to offer your resignation twice, that was an example of you feeling like you were pushed against your values. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll tell you a very quick story. I had an individual who made a big mistake and almost crashed a jet. And the Air Force decided that that individual should be punished, that they shouldn't be allowed to fly and everything else. And I said, listen, that individual got up in the morning, looked in the mirror, and tried to do the best that they could. They made a giant mistake. They cost the Air Force a lot of money,
Sure.
but they didn't do it because they didn't have integrity. They did it because they made a mistake. And I said, I don't want to be in a military that punishes people for mistakes and not for crimes. If you do a crime, you got to be punished. If
Sure.
you make a mistake, you get retrained, cross-trained, or they find someplace else for you. But in this situation, I wrote a letter to a 4-star general and said, listen, I cannot be the commander of this organization if that's what's going to happen to my people. Dub, I would tell you, so the commander sided with me and he said, do what you think is right. We had a meeting where I told the whole wing that I forgave this pilot. I was putting him in a special training program. I would recertify him, and he would, if he qualified, he would become a full member. People stood up and started yelling. It changed our whole wing and the attitude of the whole wing. This individual went on to become a 2-star general and is probably still going to continue his quest for even more. It wasn't because I saved him. I did what was right. And in my mind, you can't punish somebody for a mistake when they were having integrity and they were doing the best. And I will tell you, Doug, the other thing that came out of this, our wing went on to get an outstanding evaluation. It was the first time since the Air Force was founded that a wing got an outstanding on this kind of readiness, and it has not been matched. And it wasn't because of me, it was because everybody knew that they had a place and that I was their cheerleader. And I think this whole concept of cheerleading is so important. It was critical to the way I lead. So not only do you have to have values, but you have to look for people doing a good job and reward them when that happens.
Yeah, but again, I think what you just said there is so very important. The willingness to be a cheerleader for your people and not throw people under the bus because they made a mistake, but rather to hold them to a set of values and say, you know, is this aligned with your values? Did you do the best you could in the context of that? Versus, well, you were a bad boy and here's a slap on the wrist and you're going to get punished. It's like, I feel like so much of that has been lost. I want to come to this because I think it's an important thing. You share in the book, Flight Path, Son of Africa to Warrior-Diplomat. You share in there that it's designed to help leaders remember. Tell us what you mean by that. Because we're not going to remember your stories, although we might. They're not, the purpose of the book is not to have us remember your stories, right? It's to remind us of something within ourselves.
Yeah, every story in that book ties to a lesson that I had in my life. and little things like keeping your priorities the priority, and and this whole concept of integrity, and the whole thing about prioritizing your family, and about learning things and filling your brain up and your heart up, because those are the things that stay with you for your entire life, and are not depending on situations or anything else. That's just you. And so I the book hopefully will help people understand what I learned in almost 60 years of living life. I mean, the whole experience, everything has really come together to help me understand that it's not about me. It's about making sure my people are successful. And when I was in combat, I spent my evenings writing letters back to mothers and fathers and moms and spouses about their husbands and wives and children. And I had people come back to me and said, I still have your letter on our refrigerator years later,
Wow.
and taking the time to write a thank you letter, taking the time to offer praise is so important. I have 3 trademark awards that I've given out over my career. And the first one is Copion Award. And that's basically, it says, I think it means to work until you're utterly exhausted. And when I would find somebody who is just putting in the hours and trying so hard, I would take time out to recognize them with a Copion Award.
Right.
The other one is a Porto. When ships used to be sailing, they would have to wait outside the harbor until the tide and the wind came together, and so they could make it in. And that was ab porto. And that's how we get our word opportunity. And there's people that find that initiative, and when they have that opening, act on it. And it's so important to recognize those people for their initiative. The last one is the Tarango Towers Award. It's a mountain range in Pakistan that's almost pure vertical. And we have people working for us through professionalism and self-will and for motivation, and because they believe in the mission and they believe in the community, will scale these straight up vertical walls for you. And you just can't take it for granted.
Right.
And I always thought of myself as somebody that sat back and gave vision. And that's what I like to do, is make sure people understand where the organization is going, and make sure they understand in a very short word what we're trying to accomplish with our organization. And then if they didn't get it, I would give them good vision. And I would tell them a little bit clearer what it was. And I would lay out a few more milestones. And then there's a few people that you have to give them supervision because they just don't get it. And those folks you put under supervision and you watch them a little bit closer. But you, as a leader, you strive to be in the position of just vision. And if we can sit there and be cheerleaders and just write awards, I think that's cool. I had one little quick story on, we had this inspection I talked to you about, and we had to generate 72 airplanes. And when I went to bed the night before, we only had 71, and it took 72 to get this outstanding. While I was sleeping, a young airman was trying to fix the heads-up display in this F-15, and it wouldn't work. He ran over to the simulator, found out it was the same part number in the simulator, called up Ohio, Dayton, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and got permission for a one-time flight, put the simulator heads-up display in the airplane. The airplane took off at 8:05 the next morning. My job was to just give that guy an achievement medal for what he did. Sure. I was the cheerleader. I had nothing to do with it. It wasn't me. I got the credit for it in some way because it was our wing that did so well. But it was the team effort of everybody working together and finding that niche and figuring out how they fit into the vision and the strategic goals and the mission. and just letting them loose, and then sit back and be the cheerleader and write letters of congratulations, give out the team awards, and appreciate the contribution of every part of your team. That, of course, is after you've made sure that they're resourced, trained, and equipped. But if you take those responsibilities of training and resourcing and equipping, then you just sit back with your feet on the desk and write thank you letters. It's awesome.
Fabulous. Well, I got to say that this has been an extraordinary show. And as a result, we're going to do a part 2. So for those of you who are enjoying this, part 2 will be up next on your player. I am here, of course, as I introduced, with the author of a unique and inspirational memoir called Flight Path, Son of Africa to Warrior-Diplomat, with retired Major General and Ambassador Scott Gration. We're going to be back with Scott in part 2 of this episode, and you can find out more about Scott Gration by going to scottgration.com. That's SCOTTGRATION.com. And of course, we will put that in the show notes. And remember that you can hang out with our conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episode inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast, because it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist or executive advisor for yourself or your organization, go to dovbaron.com. Because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness in all individuals and in companies. And thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Until next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about the difference between doing what's right and doing the right thing. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. We'll see you in part 2 of our episode with retired Major General Scott Gration. I'm out.